Welcome to That Means Nothing to Me. We have an unbelievable episode today. You'll get that joke in a minute. The interview you're about to hear was an incredible experience for me. I grew up being a fan of Ripley's Believe It or Not. I had all the books. I bought them at the Scholastic Book Fair at school. And my dog is named Ripley. So this was huge. This was a huge deal for me. I had an absolute blast recording it. It's my favorite episode I've made so far. I know I say it a lot. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy.
Hello, I'm Edward Meyer. I worked for 40 years with Ripley's Believe It or Not as the Vice President of Exhibits and Archives. I'm very, very proud of my career with Ripley's, but I'm even more proud of my dealings with people, both privately and publicly. People are the most important thing in my life. But, I'm very proud of my 40 years with Ripley's. I've been places that most people haven't. I've done some pretty strange things that I don't think anybody else has done. And, along the way, I've met some very, very interesting people. For sure, the best part of the job was the people. Everything from astronauts and professional sports to people in a little back room of a house making stuff out of lint or toothpicks, A lady named Slater Barron in Newport, California. When I first met her, she did portraits of English kings and queens out of lint. I bought a few of those, and she had a career longer than mine, but over time, she ended up making anything you wanted, basically, out of lint. And for Ripley's specifically, we would build a museum in a place like Hong Kong or Thailand, and we would want something that was, historically significant to that area. We would commission her to make pieces.
Wow.
Maybe one of the most famous was a life-size portrait of John Wayne for our museum in Hollywood. But my favorite was 𝕔𝕐𝐻𝐸, the man who China is named after. But most importantly, he's the guy that unified the country and started building the Great Wall of China. So, a really major significant player in the grand scheme of things. And she did a fabulous piece that for the 10 years we were in Hong Kong, it was there. And I believe it is now in New York City, but there's nothing like it in the entire world. I mean, it is a truly, truly unique and unbelievable piece. Toothpicks, guy up in New York, his name escapes me at this moment, but he built what he called Toothpick City. He made over 300 of the world's most famous buildings all out of toothpicks. The sheer magnitude, the scope was unbelievable. 300 plus buildings. So those are a couple samples. I have written 2 books since I've retired. The first one is called Buying the Bizarre, The Confessions and Adventures of a Compulsive Collector. And it tells my 40 years with Ripley's Believe It or Not. My second book is called A Man in the Blues, A Love Story. And it's actually 50 years of my life, so even a bit longer. But all the time I was working with Ripley's, my personal hobby has always been American blues music. Now, people that know me well knew it, but it never came out in interviews or anything. It wasn't what people were interested in Edward about.
Right.
So I see the two books together. They're both memoirs of a type, but together they tell the whole story of Edward Meyer, the public side with Ripley's, the private side with the blues. And, if anything, I am probably most proud of that in 2 years I've written two books. And they're both big books. We're not talking 50 pages here.
Yeah.
They're both close to 600 pages. And, if no one reads them, I feel a great sense of accomplishment having written them, and I've at least left a legacy to my family.
How did you first find the blues? How did this part of your story start?
Well, I'm gonna say it grabbed me immediately, but yes, the origin story is pretty funny, or at least pretty significant. Like any other child of the 1960s, for those listening, I'm 64 years old at this point. So I was very young when the Beatles hit, but for the first 2 or 3 years of my musical life, the Beatles were everything. My last year in grade school, and all of my close friends were always a couple of years older than I am. So I was the youngest of the gang as such. But in my last year at age 13, my buddy and I went to a dance in the next school over, and we saw a bad garage band called Electric Mud. And Electric Mud, whether it's a good name or a bad name, and to be honest, I can't even remember what kind of music they played, but it was bad. It was not good. And a couple days later, we were at our friend Michael Keel's house, and Michael had an older brother named Don. And I mentioned to Michael that he made the right decision not going to the dance. The band Electric Mud was terrible. The $1 or whatever to get in, it wasn't worth it. The band was horrible. And off to the side, his older brother Don heard me say Electric Mud and went on a tirade. He basically said that Electric Mud was a bad album. It was Muddy Waters' worst album, but it was better than a whole lot of other stuff that was out there. How dare you say this about Electric Mud? I said, wait a minute, Don, we're talking about two different things. I'm not talking about an album called Electric Mud. I'm talking about a band called Electric Mud. And, so he didn't beat me up, but he left it in my brain that I didn't know what I was talking about and that I should check out this guy named Muddy Waters. And so the first opportunity I did. And I still have that record. It's still one of my favorite records, Muddy Waters, More Real Folk Blues. The songs on it are from like 1949, 50, 51, 52, but as an album, it came out in 67. So in 68, it was still a, relatively new album. Muddy Waters is very important to my life and obviously to the book as well. So from that one weird little episode with Muddy Waters, my record collection grew from Beatles to a few odds and ends. Not a lot because, I didn't have a bunch of money and I'm still only 13 years old. So, I'm not spending every cent on records yet, yet being important there. And then kind of a second epiphany, an older sister of mine, a friend of hers named Malcolm O'Brien came into our house and literally tore Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band off of the turntable and said, you should be listening to this. And he put on the first Robert Johnson album. And so those two moments, literally epiphanies, Muddy Waters got me into the blues, and then Robert Johnson sort of, was like the pinch hitter, sealed the situation. And Muddy Waters, I liked instantly. Robert Johnson needed to grow on me a little bit, but pretty soon I was, tracing the roots of those two and that led to everything. I mean, today I have roughly 5,000 blues records,
Wow.
probably 200 blues books, hundreds of blues magazines, guitar, a BB King pocket watch, movie posters. You know, my collection today isn't just the physical music, it's everything related to it. And, you know, my life at Ripley's as an archivist has taught me to collect things. And, you know, thus the title of my first book. I was always collecting for Ripley's, but on the side, I was always collecting for Edward.
Did you ever run into anything where you saw it and you thought this would be great in a Ripley's museum, but also at the same time you were thinking this would be great for Edward's museum?
Well, yeah, there's several of those, and clearly my leanings and what I bought Ripley's have a lot to do with, you know, my personal decisions. You know, as the guy that was in charge, you know, I the whole 40 years I was with Ripley's, I was never allowed to sign a check. So there's always checks and balances that what the hell is he out there spending money? You know, what is it he wants this time? And somebody else has to approve to write the check. But I never had anybody saying, no, you can't do that. You know, they may say, can you get it cheaper? But if Edward thought that this was right for Ripley's, you know, Edward went out and bought it. Not exactly answering the question you asked, but a funny one is, you know, again, the name slips my mind, but in the 1940s, there is the equivalent of what I would call MTV videos in black music history. Little short one-song soundies that were made for this thing that looks like a jukebox, but it plays visuals as well as the sound. And I had the opportunity to buy one of those for Ripley's, and I just I could not justify it because I really wanted it. You know, like the company's looking at me going, what is it? Why do we want this? And trust me. But no, it literally made no sense at any price for Ripley's. It was something that I really wanted in my own home. And then, of course, I ended up buying at least 2 jukeboxes in my career, but, you know, jukebox was always something I wanted in my house too. So, you know, well, trust me, this is the best jukebox we could have. And the first one was a local one, which is kind of an interesting Ripley story. A guy out by Claremont, Florida, his entire life, I can't imagine the poor bugger. His wife collected everything and anything with Betty Boop on it. Their windows, their dishes, their carpet, their front door, and their jukebox. When she died, probably the next day, I mean, he must have wanted to get rid of this stuff. And the house was pink and red, okay? Pink and red house. So he was trying to sell the entire Betty Boop collection, and no one in their right mind is going to buy. I think he had 3,700 pieces with Betty Boop on it.
Oh my God.
But I ended up buying 20 or 30 of what I thought were the best, including a jukebox shaped like Betty Boop. It was pretty cool.
So it wasn't like a jukebox that was decorated like Betty Boop. It was literally shaped like Betty Boop.
Combination of both. The front end is Betty Boop. The sides, the lighting, all decorated, but, you know, the back end is still a square basic jukebox. But it was, you know, from 1945 or something. It was super vintage, gorgeous jukebox with all the bubble effect and all the stuff that you look for in a good jukebox. So those are, you know, samples that I hope sort of answer your question. I mean, they come to mind instantly, but I'm sure there was others too. I mean, if we go beyond the music side of things, you know, from an early age, I was interested in Egyptian mummies and dinosaurs. So, you know, a dream come true when I get a chance to actually buy dinosaur skeleton or an Egyptian mummy. But, you know, it was part of my soul that said, hey, you know, we really should buy this. This is the coolest thing that we're ever going to get a chance to put in a Ripley's museum. And somebody else that didn't like dinosaurs wouldn't have thought that way. But, you know, the guy that had the check that was buying the stuff wanted dinosaurs in Ripley's. And that was a major deal. 1993, Jurassic Park, the first movie came out, dinosaurs were everywhere. And, I'd loved dinosaurs since I was like 5 years old. But, I could walk into the president of Ripley's and say, dinosaurs are a big draw right now. We should have dinosaurs in our Ripley Museum. And the first time I went to China, I bought probably close to $1 million worth of dinosaur fossils, and specifically dinosaur eggs. Ripley's has probably the biggest collection of dinosaur eggs in the world.
Speaking of the actual process of going overseas, spending an inordinate amount of money on something, and then getting it back to the US, how does that whole process work?
Well, China was a tough one, and I would hazard to say China's still a tough one. But 1993, my getting to China was even difficult. That for me was a first big step, changing the way I did business, and also changing the company to become much more an international company than just an American company. So in let's call it 1991, I presented at a board meeting a desire to buy large Chinese sculptures made out of jade. And the largest one I had seen at that point was in Chicago. And he listened to me and said, well, are you really interested in this? And why? And basically, my defense at the time was that Robert Ripley's favorite country was China. And, his personal collection, the things he put in his house, tended to be Chinese art. And I thought that we could bring back Robert Ripley as a character like Disney does with Disney. If we had some Chinese artifacts, that's how we could present Ripley the man as an introduction to Ripley the collection. And so we went to what was called the Guangzhou Arts Trade Festival Conference, whatever. It's like a 10-day thing that still happens every year. But when I went in 1993, and I spent roughly $2 million in like 1 week. And I told you earlier, I couldn't write a check. So that's pretty tough to do right from the start. Every morning I was there, I spent the first half hour of my day in line at the American Express office getting more money, physical cash. And they'd only let you take so much. So I had to keep doing this every day. And they're probably going, what the hell is this guy spending so much money for? Every day he's back there in this line. So I would put down a cash deposit on whatever I was interested in, sign a contract, agree to spend X number of dollars for X number of objects. And I went away from China having spent, physically quite a lot of money in cash, but, assigned to spend over $1 million. And I took nothing with me. I came home with an empty suitcase. So a lot of faith. And that stuff, that first load from China took over 6 months before we saw it. And when it arrived, it came perfect. I mean, nothing broken. Everything that I had agreed to buy was there. That we were pretty darn impressed with China. The people we were dealt with, they delivered the goods, and the stuff was very successful for Ripley. So we ended up going back a couple times. We went outside the trade show to a factory where they were actually producing the sculptures. No idea where we're going, no communication for like an hour and a half car ride, and we're out in the middle of nowhere. To this day, I couldn't tell you where we were in relationship to the city of Guangzhou, other than we were about 90 minutes somewhere. And we walked into a building that had nothing but big giant jade sculptures in it. Big, huge, empty rectangular building, no fancy air conditioning, no furniture, just a big warehouse with people at desks. And there would be one primary artist who designed the piece, but there could be even more so with the camel bone, as I said, but maybe a dozen people working on it. One person does the dragons, one person does feathers. One person does the sails of the sailboats. Like everybody's got a little job, and only one person, designs it, really knows what the whole thing is going to look like when they put it together. All hand labor. Hundreds of employees carving jade in this building. And I've never seen anything like it. On the humorous side, as I said, I tend to get into trouble every now and then. I broke a piece when we were only like 2 minutes into the building.
Oh no.
And like the only other person that speaks English with me is going, uh-oh, we're in trouble now. Like, I guess we have to buy something, and blah, blah, like they're yattering in Chinese and we're going, uh-oh, are they saying they're going to kill us? And, there was an element of, it seemed like something out of a James Bond movie. But we ended up spending, I think we bought 15 large pieces that day. It was an amazing experience.
Coming up, two very different kinds of dresses.
For 3 or 4 years, I judged a toilet paper wedding dress contest. And that was a heck of a lot of fun. I actually just about a week ago was talking to one of the two sisters that started the contest in the company, and informed her that anytime they ever need a judge again, even if I'm retired, I'd do that job again. The first time, the company is called Cheap Chic Weddings. And my wife saw them on the Martha Stewart television show. They, year number 1. I think they're in like year number 15 or so now. But she saw this and she called me at work and said, "You gotta turn on Martha Stewart right now. She's got these people making wedding dresses out of toilet paper. It's amazing," and as the Ripley guy, yeah, that sounds amazing. You don't have to hard sell me. Sure. Toilet paper wedding dresses. How cool is this? So I called them, and from year 2 up until about year 10, Ripley's was very involved. We held a couple of them in our Ripley museums, specifically in New York. And what they would do is, it's about a 3-month gig that anybody can enter, but the dress they make has to be made totally out of toilet paper. No particular kind, no limit to how much toilet paper. You can make it as thick as you want so that it holds together, but they have to be able to wear it at least once. It has to be a wearable outfit that they can do a fashion show with. So for 4 years, I was the head judge of the toilet paper fashion show, and that's there's a chapter about that in my book, Buying the Bizarre, because it was a very unique job as such. But based on those success of the toilet paper wedding dresses, we started buying clothing made from other things, such as pop tins, bubble gum wrappers, whatever. And, none of them are as good as the toilet paper. That's baffling. But, there are artists and design people out there that are very creative, making clothing out of things that you wouldn't normally think. So we saw this as a trend. And so we started buying stuff, for a couple of years. Edward was on the lookout for clothing made from odd things. So we got enough of it that during Fashion Week, we held our own fashion show. And I got to be a bit of the MC, but as the male escort to all the ladies. So I wore a tuxedo that was from the television show Dallas, worn by whatever his name is, the star. So I looked good in a special tuxedo. And I would walk down the runway with a lady wearing a dress made out of gum wrappers or toilet paper or whatever. So that's my career as beauty contests.
That's so cool that your wife just so happened to be watching Martha Stewart at the time that those dresses were there, and it led to the entire era of Ripley purchasing clothing.
Oh yeah, and as I said, I was involved with the wedding dress ladies for probably 7 or 8 years. That we got to what happened. We would give money for them to hold the contest, and we would get the prize-winning dresses. That was the deal. So every year I was getting 3 or 4 new dresses. That was my job, is to get things to display. Here was a way that I was guaranteed several new dresses every year just by making a couple-hour appearance, which I kind of like to do anyway. And in this case, fun places like New York and pretty girls. Florida stories. You want Florida stories? Is that?
Of course, sure, absolutely.
All right. So, and these are in the book. But meeting 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚. Do you know who 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 is?
I do
Okay.
not.
1950s seminal rock and roll guy. Basically is borderline blues. He started blues and he never left it, but he made his name as a rock and roll pioneer. And 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 to me is one of those absolute pivotal people. All kinds of different music came out of what he called the jungle 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 beat. He created a sound that nobody else was doing at the time, and imitated by hundreds others after.
What's the technique of 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚?
Well, for the last several years of his life, 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 lived in Gainesville, Florida. Actually, a little farm just outside of Gainesville. The Ripley warehouse and the oldest Ripley museum is in St. Augustine, Florida. And so I used to spend a lot of time in St. Augustine, and about half a mile north of the museum in St. Augustine, a really cool little secondhand record store. Every time I went to St. Augustine, I'd spend an hour in the record store and spend some money. And I'm sitting there looking at the few blues records that are in the record store. It's not a specialty shop, it's just a used record store. And so, there's only a few blues records. And I'm looking through, and I sense somebody behind me, the improper spacing, not giving me my space. And this guy's obviously got to be a big guy. He's breathing down my neck. Yeah, I'm going as fast as I can, whatever. And eventually I just okay, just let him have the section, and I'll come back to it when he's finished. And I turn around and, oh my God, it's 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚. And I literally screamed it. And, everybody in the record store, not too many people, a little, but, what the heck's going on over there in the corner? And I'm stuck, 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚. I didn't know how to address him. I knew his real name was 𝐒𝐿IZA McDaniels. And I said, Mr. McDaniels, I'm a big fan. And he says, you got to call me Mr. You can't call me 𝕚. I don't want everybody in St. Augustine knowing that 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚 shops in a secondhand record store. So I never did actually see what he bought, but I still have the receipt from what I bought, which I have a picture of in the book saying, the day I met 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚, secondhand record store shopping in St. Augustine, Florida. Fast forward a bunch of years, and the Historical Society here in Orlando had a display of Florida rock and roll musicians, and they advertised that they were going to have Wayne Cochran and 𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚. I guess it's fortunate and unfortunate. Wayne Cochran didn't play. Wayne Cochran was just there, but we got to meet him. And because he wasn't playing, we got to spend quality time with him, got to talk to him. I got an autograph photo with him, and that sort of thing. And then Bo Diddley played, and that was the last time I saw Bo Diddley and the only time I saw Wayne Cochran. But, in my mind, Wayne Cochran is probably the most important Florida artist of all time, another pioneer of rock and roll. And, Bo Diddley wasn't from here, but he spent a lot of time in Florida. So put those two guys together, and it was a great day for Florida music. Both those guys I would call rhythm and blues as opposed to straight blues, very different than Muddy Waters or the Robert Johnson we talked about earlier. But, I like all kinds of blues. I like classic vaudeville singers like Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey. My favorites are Chicago blues guys like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. But, I like just about anybody you could name is probably I got a record or two of. And, Wayne Cochran, he was most famous for being the front band before Elvis. He had a long career being Elvis's opening act. I mean, how much better in rock and roll history can you get than that? And if any of your listeners, aren't aware of either of those artists, Bo Diddley was probably the first rock and roll star on Ed Sullivan. There's a 1955 clip of Bo on Ed Sullivan. And Wayne Cochran on the David Letterman show from about, I don't know, maybe 1980 or so.
Hi there, welcome back to the show. We have quite a show for you tonight.
Is 5 minutes of the greatest rock and roll ever put down on film. He literally tears up the studio.
Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Wayne Cochran.
Your book is called A Man in the Blues, A Love Story. Who is it mostly written for?
I think anybody that likes blues will like the book. It is written for people that know something already, but general enough with a very big glossary. There's like 60-page glossary of explaining what things are if you don't know them.
Wow.
But I think in my mind, what I really wanted was to tell people things that would make you go looking for them in whatever medium you want, whether it's live performance, a book, a YouTube, whatever. But it's full of very opinionated things that some, will get you just thinking, but some are going to get you going, this guy's a nut. Like Muddy Waters isn't really better than B.B. King or whatever. But, there's list of my favorite records, there's list of my favorite concerts, there's list of my favorite nightclubs, that sort of thing, so that you get a whole sense of the blues community as seen through the eyes of a white guy from Toronto, Canada. And the Canadian content, I think, is important because it's American blues. It's America's gift to the world. But as a Canadian, I have a different look on it as a guy that grew up in Mississippi or a guy that grew up in Chicago or LA or any places where the blues were big. My insight is a different opinion. That's what I think makes the book worth buying, because it's not going to be like some guy that went to school in, Tampa, Florida or something. I think I learned a little bit in writing the first book that I think writing-wise the second one is better. But I would hope that people would read both, because if they're interested in me, they go together. Two different subjects, but the same personality behind them.
Out of all of the research that I had done online, one thing kept popping up next to Edward Meyer's name over and over again, and that was the dress.
Mr. President, on this occasion of your birthday, this lovely lady is not only punctilious, but punctual. Mr. President, Marilyn Monroe.
know you've been asked about this a million times. Would you mind giving me the story about the Marilyn Monroe dress?
Well, it actually has 2 chapters in the book, because I first ran into Marilyn and the dress specifically in 1999. An auction, Christie's auction in New York City, which was the first Marilyn Monroe estate auction. It was a big deal. Lots of celebrities in the house, lots of pre-advertising, TV shows announcing it was going to happen, TV shows covering it live. CNN was, literally covered the thing live on TV. The highlight of that auction, of about 500 pieces of Marilyn Monroe stuff, was the birthday dress Marilyn Monroe wore to sing Happy Birthday to JFK in Madison Square Gardens for his birthday in 1962.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
The suggested auction price was probably in the I can't remember, but I'm going to say $100,000, which was still a lot of money, but a lot of money for a dress, and more than any dress probably in 1993 had sold for. But as an auction expert of sorts, I hazard to use that word, but I'm supposed to be the expert. Let's put it that way. The owner of the company phones me on a Saturday afternoon. I'm outside at my pool, and he says, "What are you doing next Saturday?" And this is a loaded question. He doesn't phone me too often, period, but never on a Saturday when I'm outside with a beer in my hand on poolside. "I want you to go shopping for me in New York for Marilyn Monroe stuff." And he had interest to buy stuff for himself, not for Ripley's, but for himself. I didn't even know this auction was happening at this point, 1 week before. So first thing I do Monday morning is I get the catalog, so I know what we're looking at. And I see that there's a few things that will be good for Ripley's, and a few things that, presumably are going to be good for his purposes. I meet him in New York on the, I think it's a Thursday night, maybe a Friday night, I can't remember. Yeah, Friday night, I guess. And the press sort of element to an auction was the Friday night with the high-end items, including the birthday dress. Now, I thought that he wanted the birthday dress. He thought I wanted the birthday dress for Ripley's. So there was some miscommunication. I bid $1 million for it. I was what is called the underbidder. It sold for 1.1. The very next bid of $100,000 got the dress. At the time, I was kind of relieved because I didn't have the right to spend $1 million. Okay, I didn't really, if I had bought the dress, I'm not sure what would have happened. But I didn't buy the dress, bought a bunch of other stuff. I spent a lot of money. In total, over the 2 days, I did spend almost $2 million. But so the Friday night, I meet him Saturday morning, and he says, "So did you buy the dress?" I said, "No, I didn't buy the dress. I didn't know you wanted the dress." And, "Oh, I thought you wanted the dress." And I said, no. Like, too much for Ripley's. We haven't got the budget to buy $1 million dress. Oh, okay. And, I sensed that, he really wanted the dress, but because there was a miscommunication, we didn't buy the dress for $1 million. Flash forward 16 years, almost 17 years, 16 and a half years. The dress is now for auction again. This time it's going to be in California in Beverly Hills, Julian's auction house. And I said to him, I said to my boss, I said, the Marilyn Monroe dress that we didn't get 16 years ago is coming for sale again. I'd like to bid on it. And basically he said, no, we're not going to spend $1 million on a dress. And, I knew at this point it's going to be more than $1 million.
Sure,
the value's gone up over 16 years. So, but I said, can I call the owner and ask him? Because I think, he really wanted it 16 years ago, and he might be willing to put some money towards my, my budget so that I can afford to bid on this dress. And his response instantly was, he remembered. This is the dress you didn't buy 17 years ago? Yeah, Jimmy, that's the dress we didn't buy 17 years ago. Well, what's it going to go for? And I said, well, my guess is probably $5 million. And, it wasn't a gasp as much as a silence. And then, no, we're not going to spend $5 million. But that time period where there was no sound led me to believe that he was still interested. And sure enough, he called me 3 or 4 times over the next couple of weeks going, what's the word on the dress? What's the word on the dress? And the expression, what's the word on the street? What am I hearing? And I said, well, I think I'm right, Jimmy. It's going to go around $5 million. And, he didn't say anything. He just kept asking the same question. So he calls me at some point and says, well, let's go. I want you to go to the auction. I want you to be in the room and we'll play it by ear and see what happens. As it turned out, it was a very special day in my life on both accounts. I was at a movie premiere at the New York Film Festival for a film that I was involved in with Ripley's. And it's the only time in my life that I did business in New York in the morning and did business in LA the same day in the evening. So I flew across the country. I landed, and the first thing I did was I phoned him and said, I'm on my way to the auction house. And he says, okay, well, you can spend $2 million. And I hung up the phone and said, well, we're not even going to be in the race at $2 million. It isn't going to happen. And then I got to the auction house, and I'm sitting in the relatively middle of the area. I used to like to sit very specific where I like to be in the auction house and not down front like the show-offs do. I get a call from the president of Ripley's, and he says, well, I just talked to the owner, and he wants you to call him. So I call him on the phone, and he says, I want to stay on the phone with you, and we're going to bid on this dress.
And now, making history, selling one of the most significant dresses in the world. This dress is a piece of history, and you can own it tonight.
The dress started at $1 million.
Who'll give $5 million? I've got $2 million to start.
It hits $2 million within a couple seconds. $2 million, it's now going up by $500,000. So it goes from 2 to 2.5. And I says, Jimmy, it's now over our 2 million. Next bid's 2.5. I got him on the phone on one ear and listening to what's going on in the other. And he says, bid. So I bid at 2.5, and it was mine for what seemed like an eternity. The auctioneer is begging someone else to go to the 3 million mark.
Would anybody get 3 million? We have 2 million.
And I'm sitting there sweating, going, oh my God, come on, get it over with. It's mine at 2.5 million. And, at the very last second, he gets the $3 million bid.
3 million, I got 3 million, $4 million, $4 million. We have 3 million bid, $4 million.
And so Jimmy, it's not ours at 3 million. And to my surprise, he says bid. And so I bid,
We have 3 million bid. Any other bids? At 4 million. $4 million we have bid. Fair warning, last call. Ladies and gentlemen, this dress just sold for $4.81 million of buyer's premium. Ripley's Believe It or Not.
It's mine. I get it. And the place is like chaos. I've got paparazzi every inch of me. Room is erupting in applause. Had a woman out to be the president of the Marilyn Monroe Society give me a big hug and crying on my shoulder. And I go, "Who are you, lady?" And so I was pretty big celebrity for at least an hour. My posse of my assistant and my wife and I went out and had a big fancy dinner at midnight and to celebrate. And after like 3 hours of doing interviews, went to bed and my phone rang at like 5 a.m. and it was England. And so the news had already hit Europe. And so I was on the phone until like 3 in the afternoon that day. So like literally about 10 hours of nothing but talking about what happened last night. We ended up having roughly 1 billion media hits worldwide. Wow. Never in the history of Ripley's did we have that kind of attention. It brought the company to a whole different level of acknowledgement of, limelight. So I get a call from Jimmy and he says, "So you bought the dress last night?" I said, "Yeah, Jimmy." And, he clearly had already heard. He'd seen it on the news by that time, whatever. But they all quoted 4.8 and he thought it was 4. He'd been on the phone when I bought it, but he didn't add the tax. So he's reading in the paper that it's 4.8 and, oh my God, how did we get 4.8? I agreed to 4, like how much profit is Edward making, And so it became a bit of a joke. And then we debuted the dress in Toronto. We had a very big gala affair, tuxedos and the whole bit. And we spent almost $100,000 on a display case for the thing. Okay, wow. Had to get all special humidity control, light control, unbreakable glass, security. It became a huge deal. We ended up building a special crate to travel with it on a private jet. We wouldn't put it on a commercial airline. And we did a 4 or 5 city tour of it to different Ripley places as well. Jimmy took it to his hometown in Saskatchewan, a town of about 300 people. Were the first people that got to see it. It was a pretty amazing story. People driving hours and hours to see it because nothing like this had ever happened in the middle of Saskatchewan. So I did 2 or 3 openings with it, San Francisco and Dallas and here in Orlando, and did a little dog and pony show. And as I said at the start of the story, we'd bought a bunch of stuff in 1999. From 1999 to 2016, I'd been buying Marilyn fairly often anytime I saw something. So we were able to create a whole traveling exhibit of Marilyn Monroe artifacts with the dresses as the big wow factor. So the most expensive thing I ever bought in my 40-year career, the most publicized thing, the most joked about thing. Everybody asked me, do I look good in it? Does it fit me well? That sort of thing. And understandably, Marilyn Monroe, in my mind, is one of the absolute icons of the 20th century. I don't think her popularity will ever wane. I put her, Elvis and Sinatra, and maybe Michael Jackson, as the gods of publicity. That any time you got something that connects with Marilyn Monroe, you're going to have some success. And in this case, connected with John F. Kennedy, one of the most popular presidents of all time, and the whole mystique of Marilyn's death shortly after, whether she had a romance with Kennedy, all of that, the dress is a no-brainer in my mind, even at $4.8 million. It'll take a long time to get that money back, but eventually they will. It will not go down in value, let's put it that way.
So you found and collected lint statues, toothpick buildings, giant sculptures made of jade, blues memorabilia, all this stuff from all over the world. What are you still searching for? What would you say is the Holy Grail?
Well, I don't know if there is such a thing. That term Holy Grail gets used a lot, and I used it personally quite a lot. It goes with what is popular at the time. The Holy Grail in 1993, when we were talking about dinosaurs, would have been a T-Rex. Can I find a T-Rex skeleton? Well, no. Later in my life I did, but not in 1993. But, I guess it depends on the time and place. Sort of answering your question, but sort of avoiding it. The one thing I never bought is called a �ム𝐾𝐬, a tattooed human head from New Zealand Maori tribe. Right? At some point it became illegal, so that's why I never bought one. But, it's something I was always wanting to buy. And certainly when I got to New Zealand, it was the highlight of my trip to go see a museum in New Zealand that had like 50 of them. I have the Ripley longtime wax figure artist made me one. So I have a fake one in my house, which is one of my absolute treasures. I adore the thing. But, it's a reminder that there was ethics involved, that some things are off limits, no matter how cool they are. There's no point in buying this if you're going to get protesters at your front door or, whatever. So that is one of those Holy Grail things that is out there. I had two offered to me, but, we made conscious decision. No, this is not something you want to do.
That's incredible. Edward, thank you so much for talking to me.
You're supposed to say that's unbelievable, but since I don't work
I'm
for
sorry.
Ripley
Oh,
anymore,
no.
I don't have to say that. That's Incredible was our competition back in the early 80s,
Oh, I'm so sorry. If you're interested in learning more about Edward, in his past with Ripley's Believe It or Not, or his history with the blues, you can check out both of his books available on Amazon. I will have links to purchase them in the show notes. That Means Nothing to Me is a podcast hosted by me, 𝐒𝐚𝐽. Audio editing is done on Audacity Suite 2.3.0, and we're recorded on a Yeti Blackout omnidirectional mic. All of our music credits for this episode can be found in the show notes wherever it is you are listening to this. Special thanks go to Edward Meyer and everyone who I have incessantly texted about being on my show. I know you're sick of it, but I'm not going to stop. Another reminder, I mentioned it in the previous episode, but our Patreon is up and running, so if you want to support the show, even with $1 a month, you can head over there and do just that. There's a couple cool rewards I came up with, like a live show or getting your name in the credits. So read through each one and see if there's something in it that applies to you. We're still working on the formatting, length, and overall vibe of the show, so if you have any questions, comments, or you want to let me know what you thought, please shoot me a message at contact@thatmeansnothing.com, or we can be found on all social media at thatmeans0, the number 0. Thanks for listening.